your voice. He'll never let you down, make him rejoice. Hallelujah, hallelujah. We finally had a man who hears your voice. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Tim O'Connor is the only choice. Right in, Tim O'Connor, Libertarian, for New York State Senate, Senate District 51.
All right, guys, once again, I got to thank my buddy Harold Mark Jordan, Hot Vent, for creating that for me. I appreciated it. Obviously, I didn't win the election. That's not necessarily the point. Joining me tonight, Thomas Daniel Queter and Rich Purtell, two members of the Libertarian Party. We want to bring an issue and a call to action, basically, where we're going to ask you guys to do something. We're going to discuss a couple bills that have made it through the New York State Senate and are now in committee in the House, and we want to talk about that situation. But remember, guys, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's courage to continue that counts, and that's why we're here. All three of us at separate times ran races to offer you guys better representation in the New York State House of the Assembly and the Senate. So, Rich, I'm going to point to you first. I want you to kind of start to go into the details. First, tell everybody who you are and a little bit about what we're trying to do here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll keep introduction brief. Currently, I'm on the executive committee of the Libertarian Party in New York. There's 10 of us on the committee. I'm one of the at-large members, and also I was appointed chair in December to the LPNY Legislative Affairs Subcommittee, and our purpose is to attack things like this, states level legislation, not federal, not local, just the state level legislation, things that are bad that we want to end, things that are coming up, as we're talking about tonight, that we want to stop, and maybe good ideas that we'd like to implement. So, any change in state government.
So we're seeking to influence our elected legislative leaders. What are the odds of us being able to do that?
You have to do it from a grassroots level, but I have connections too through the years with the Chamber of Commerce and Lawsuit Reform Alliance in New York. I've been to Albany a couple times for lobby days. So a combination of grassroots, things like this help getting out to the general public and general citizens and voters to take an action, but also working with New York State Farm Bureau and other names I mentioned through the special interest types groups to say, hey, here's an idea we like. So we don't get caught up in the political label. We say, here's an idea we want to launch. And it doesn't matter whether we're, libertarian or independent or whatever party we're with, but we try to find people that like our idea and push it forward. And that's
so. I mean, let's simplify that for everybody. Principles over party, right? I mean, isn't that what legislative activity should be about? I mean, that's a simple leading question, obviously, right?
Right. Good ideas should win the day, not an issue of party labels. So,
okay. So, Queter, how many votes did you get in your Senate race, and what would you have done differently than what we're seeing right now? Put you right on the spot, brother. I know.
Well, I think I got something over 9,000 votes, around 13% by Ballotpedia. Differently in my campaign or differently as a legislator?
Let's start with differently as a legislator. I think right now we're seeing a couple of things. Before we get into the crux and the meat of the bills, let's just talk about our principles. So what would you do differently than what we're seeing right now?
Well, we were discussing my opponent earlier. Fred Akshar voted in favor of. Rich, you want to help me out here? What was that one that he voted in favor of?
S1024, Senate bill.
Right. And I believe that's going to allow our executive branch to mandate workplace infectious disease. Is that right?
Yeah. Let me. Well, if we're going to get into the crux of the matter, let me read the one key sentence from this bill that's 7 pages long.
Thank you.
Real quick, only take a few seconds. The commissioner, in consultation with the Department of Health, shall create and publish in both English and Spanish a model airborne infectious disease exposure prevention standard. That's a mouthful, but they refer to that sentence frequently. Model airborne infectious disease exposure prevention standard. So this is a safety standard, workplace standard for all work sites, differentiated by industry to establish minimum requirements.
What I can ascertain from that is that people will be able to sue a workplace if they get sick, and that there's no limitation to what airborne infectious disease they're talking about.
So the regulations that Bill, actually the liability is in another section in 10V. If you bring that up, any employee may bring a civil action seeking injunctive relief in a court of competent jurisdiction against an employer alleged to have violated the airborne infectious disease, prevention plan. That long phrase there. So yeah, that's another section about liability. So it's a combination of this bill does two things: hands over enormous power to the Department of Health to build these regulations, and enables employees of the companies to sue. And then this opens up the can of worms.
The lawyers are going to go real berserk with this, right?
They're going to go berserk. Yeah, and there could be trolling. Tom Stebbins of the Lawsuit Reform Alliance in New York was on a call with us last night, and he says there might not even be a supposed victim. The lawyers might go around trolling businesses without even really being a victim, just to try to extort money from businesses. So it's.
I remember in the 90s, this was an issue that was hotly discussed regarding the ADA. Once they put the ADA in place, everybody could sue everybody, and that did not foster more accessibility. What that did was drained everybody of their resources and pit two sides against each other. Now, if we see this, Fred, I'm going to keep talking about my opponent because that's what we do. He voted in favor of this. He voted in favor of businesses being liable to their workers getting sick from an airborne disease. Now, just a quick question for you, Tim. The common cold, is that an airborne disease?
Well, first of all, that's going to make this thing incredibly tricky, and that will. I think if you go to the CDC, have they even determined whether? And guys, obviously, this is in a response to the COVID pandemic, and the bureaucracy that we're being governed under. So what they're trying to do is make people feel safe about going to work, when in fact, I don't think we've determined whether COVID is actually airborne or if it's transmitted through casual contact, through droplets being put on.
I do think it's fair to say that because this is a virus and as quick as it's spread, the airborne has to be a part of it. That's my personal opinion. But here's the point here, right? My Republican opponent voted in favor of putting businesses in harm's way of liability, lawsuits for people getting sick through this bill that is not well defined. It doesn't say for COVID. It doesn't say for a pandemic situation. It doesn't say for a high mortality disease, right? It says airborne infectious disease.
Right.
Now that sounds like the opposite of growing our economy. That sounds like the opposite of getting things back the way they need to be, which in New York would have to go back, 60 years, Rich?
Right.
And, it does not seem like a good way to vote in favor of your principles that you're touting so much. He wants it to be a livable situation for the residents of New York, is what he says. He wants things to be more affordable. But what happens when we put extra expenses, extra costs on businesses? Well, everything costs more and everybody makes less, or effectively.
You guys see Garrett?
He nailed it. Yeah, Garrett nailed it. I mean, that's what's going to happen. They're going to err on the side of caution and be very ambitious with the workplace protections to try to avoid lawsuits.
Right. So now you've got also the ability to fire someone, right?
You can fire someone for not complying with your rules. Trial lawyers, guys, as we know, that's one of the biggest, hugest industries that exists in New York State, probably makes billions and billions of dollars. Okay. So trial lawyers can go shop for lawsuits where they can basically shake down a small business for just their legal fees, just to get them into compliance, like they're doing the world a favor. Is some discussion about limitations that we would like to see on this bill, and one of them would be like perhaps larger workplaces should be affected more than smaller workplaces. Honestly, though, I'd love to see the whole bill scrapped. You guys know I'm a libertarian. We have enough laws. There's enough civil liability issues that we should be able to take care of anything that's completely and totally irresponsible through normal process of law. Will it be slightly more difficult? Yes. Will trial lawyers have a harder time making money? Also, yes. Am I comfortable with that? Also, yes.
Will they really have a harder time making money, though? It's New York. I think what we'll avoid is making it easier for them to make money.
Correct. I mean, absolutely. Hello,
Doreen Parker. Bring up one other point. Can I bring up one other parallel
Please
point?
Please do, yes.
In terms of liability, New York State is unique that we have the scaffold law. And if people are not familiar with that, that's a case where if an employee is injured on the job through a gravity-related injury, the employer is always 100% liable. Even if the employee fails to use safety equipment, even if they're drunk or negligent in any other manner, it's always going to be 100% liability on the employer. And that's, we've been trying to change this in New York for years. Now, we haven't been able to change it. What's going to happen when the Department of Health builds all these regulations for this standard, and if the liability and lawsuits are enabled, and the lawsuits are in Section 10B, if the lawsuits are enabled, are we going to be in the same situation? In other words, if one employee comes in, refuses to they know they're sick, they refuse to use company-issued PPE, and they get another employee sick, really the employee is partially negligent there. But is it going to be a case where the employer is 100% liable all of the time, regardless of what employees might be doing? That's taken it a step further, where then the employer is not only victimized by having to follow maybe an absurd level of rules, but they're also victimized by irresponsible employees that might not be doing things to keep their fellow employees safe. This is just a huge can of worms.
Right. And even if a business isn't found guilty in any of the cases, but they go up against one or three, that's going to cost them money. It's going to cost them time. That's going to detriment the business. And that's not what we need right now. We need the opposite. Yes. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and guess that they all assume viruses are subject to gravity, because that's the way this sounds. They want it all to be the same. And of course, viruses are subject to gravity.
Yeah. So let's just put it under the scaffold law then. Yeah. Gravity-related injury
law is ridiculous in that point alone, because can you think of a manner to get injured in which gravity wasn't a part of it?
So look, guys, one direction I'd like to take this in, as libertarians, we regularly stand against unfunded mandates. And when I look at this bill, we have unfunded mandates on the county level, where our county governments have to comply with New York State laws and regulations. And now, as we've seen with COVID executive orders being issued, we have unfunded mandates that every restaurant now has to comply with. So I don't know if you guys have been to a restaurant, but let's say if you have, you can see a distinct increase in the cost of eating out already. This will exacerbate that situation. This is an unfunded mandate, particularly, guys, on small businesses. If you have a decently popular restaurant, the way this bill is framed right now, your staff of 10 and you will have to comply with this specific regulation, or under threat of being sued by a trial lawyer and being shaken down for a lot of money. I have a problem with that. You guys know I stand against unfunded mandates on every level, but this is particularly onerous to small businesses. And so those kind of things drive me crazy. Do you guys think that's fair to frame it in that way? Like put it in the guise of unfunded mandates, or put it on the heading of unfunded mandates?
Honestly, I would prefer not to, because I think that clouds a little bit of what we're trying to say with unfunded mandates. That unfunded mandates are regulations the state comes up with and then pushes the expense down upon county and local governments. I really would prefer we stick to that definition, just to try not to cloud, what it's about. It's just another burdensome regulation. All regulations have a cost and a burden, and they need to prove a cost-benefit analysis, but I'd rather not use that term for this.
I'm glad you just said cost benefit analysis, because that seems to be the last thing our government ever wants to do in the state.
The virtue is everything, brother. Spare no expense, right? We have to micromanage every problem that we run across.
Until nobody owns any property.
That may, in fact, be the goal here.
Yeah, I mean, the silver lining here is that they've already killed so many small businesses. There's a lot less people that are going to be affected.
Let's finish off the rest of them, right? Isn't that what's kind of going on?
It sounds like that's. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy guy at all, but it sure feels like they're really just trying to squash the bottom.
Well, let's take that a step further, because I do think that there is, and I hate to throw out the word conspiracy, but I think there's an interest in some of the people that signed yes on this bill, and that will sign yes on the assembly bill when that goes forward, and that is that to absolve themselves from the liability, what's going to be coming are adult vaccine mandates. And some of these politicians get a lot of money for their campaigns from biopharm interests. And you can imagine what's going to happen to the vaccine market in New York State if you start to roll out a whole bunch of vaccine mandates for adults to get the flu shot and COVID-19, whatever else. Think of anything that could be transmitted person to person readily. There'll be a mandate for adults, because what's going to happen is what you're doing is you're forcing these businesses to be on the side of vaccine mandates, because otherwise you're making them, you're putting them between a rock and a hard place. It's like, okay, if we do the principled thing and don't support the mandates, then we're going to be run out of business because our liability costs are going to go through the roof. So we have to cave in and do what the government wants and allow all these mandates to happen.
Right, so they're incentivizing the businesses mandate the vaccine. That's what's going to happen, right? If you want to work, I mean, am I wrong in saying that the government seems to be incentivizing a business mandating their workers get vaccinated?
No, I don't think so. I think it's going to go beyond that. I think what's going to happen is they're going to end up creating an environment where all the small businesses starts to be on the advocacy side, pro-advocacy side of vaccine mandates. And that's just more leverage. Now you have all the small businesses in New York saying, look, we give up. We can't survive unless there's vaccine mandates. So please, Mr. Government, write some vaccine mandates to make everybody in New York State get a shot. And then, now you've got if all the small businesses are saying that, you've already got biopharms saying it, and you've already got the pharmacies and the doctors, and all the people that want to see it happen anyway are pretty well on that side of the equation. So you're just tipping the scale further. I just think that's, and I don't want to say how many. I would be shocked if not 5 or 10% of the people voting for this know that this is really their ulterior motive. Hopefully it's not 20, 30, 40, 50%, but I'm sure it's some of them that know that's where this is going to take us, and the biopharm companies are lining their pockets for their campaigns, and this is the bone they're throwing them.
Yeah.
Now, am I correct? Now, I've heard this a lot in the last 2 years in the Libertarian Party, and I hear this other places as well. It sure does seem like our elected representatives don't bother to read and understand much of what they pass.
Ooh, I like that. I like that observation, Tom. I think that's one of the things that we ran our races on, is that these guys, with all due respect to them, with all due respect to the efforts that they put in, with all due respect to them as human beings, that they do not seem to understand what small businesses would like to see, what small businesses need, what the burden of taxation is doing to our communities, our families, and our opportunities for our children to grow in New York State. Now,
as Rich pointed out, they don't do a cost-benefit analysis.
Ever.
They don't understand the ramifications of what it is they're voting on.
If we could, guys, let's first of all, hello again to Doreen. Doreen is obviously, she's upstate New York farm girl. She's working on some issues where she wants to expand. And guys, as you know, I advocate for buying local protein product from your neighborhood farmer. And Doreen is a neighborhood farmer. You can make an agreement with her to get all the way down to the 16th of a cow, okay? So where you can put meat in your freezer from the guy down the road. And guys, I think that's a huge impact in your local community to keep things going. So she's saying most small places around me are hurting trying to keep up with mandates. Whether we call them unfunded or not, the reality is the government is not thinking about any of us who happen to be in small business. I happen to be in a small business. Rich, I assume your business that you're associated with isn't a huge business. So I think that 4 people. So yeah, that you know exactly what we're going through. Queter, you brought a perspective I would like to have you expand on. It's related to the American Disabilities Act and how that was abused. You see in this lawsuit or this law the same kind of potential. Would that be fair?
Oh, absolutely. And to be fair, Rich is the one that pointed it out to me. When you make someone liable or a business liable for something, and it's poorly defined, and it's broad sweeping the way this seems to be, I think we've already covered this. It's fodder for lawsuits. It's fodder for jamming up the courts. It's fodder for dragging our heels about the problems. And it's not going to accomplish much. Not much in the way of good. It's going to accomplish a lot in the way of bad because costs are going to go up for businesses. They're going to be really scared of getting in trouble. They're going to have to pay legal fees to defend themselves when it comes up. When the ADA came around, we saw this happen. Accessibility didn't increase because of the ADA. Lawsuits increased because of the ADA. Tim, you might remember going to file our petitions.
Oh yeah, I do.
Do you remember that check-in counter?
Yes, that is a story we need to just talk about it another night. But you are a brave soul. You are a polite soul. That desk was designed to intimidate. It did not facilitate your ability to communicate with the person at the desk at all. And because frankly, I was embarrassed in a sense for Tom, for myself, and for a state that doesn't realize that their mandates actually harm people in wheelchairs. Your head didn't make it to the top of that desk. You asked for accommodations where you would be able to see what you were handing to her and just hand her your ID, make your presence known. But unfortunately, right, those things were not available.
Right.
I think that's an important
the state
point.
mandated accessibility and then wasn't accessible.
It was not accessible at all. Guys, if we could first of all, take some time to shout out to Gary, who's a regular listener of the show, who is politically active in our area, and who is working hard to make New York a better place for his friends, his family, and the future. But look at this question, guys. If New York desired business destruction, what differently would they behave as they have thus far? So basically, obviously, what he's saying is, what would they do different if they wanted to not destroy businesses in New York State? They have been very effective at putting the screws to small business.
Well, all the money that they spent on controlling this pandemic, which they failed at, perhaps we could have spent in an advisory role. Could have told people, to wash your hands, and it might be wise to wear a mask. And we could have not shut down the distilleries and allowed them to make hand sanitizer. We could have allowed Remington to make the ventilators that we were lacking at one point, and we didn't allow. I mean, if you're anti-gun and a gun company says, "Well, we'll make hospital equipment," and to me that should be a win-win. Why didn't we allow that? We wouldn't have turned away the masks on the docks early on the way Cuomo did. We had cargo ships full of, they weren't FDA approved N95 masks, but they were still medical grade masks, and they were far better than a cloth mask, which, he wouldn't accept ones that weren't stamped by the FDA, but he's telling us all to make our own out of old t-shirts and underwear. That didn't make any sense to me.
Okay, I agree with you. You know that. So basically, I don't know that we can answer Garrett's question. Rich, you want to take a stab at Garrett's question? I think it's obvious, right? There's an obvious answer to it.
The differences that I just said would have lessened the destruction of businesses. If they desired to not destroy businesses, we would have simply been smarter about things and taken the opportunities at hand.
I agree, brother. What do you think, Rich?
Well, I think the way he's writing his question is like everything they've done is to destroy business. So what would they do differently if they actually intentionally did want to. So it's like nothing, It's like,
could they be more effective?
Could they be more nasty to businesses than they've been already? It'd be a challenge.
It would be a challenge for them to be worse to small businesses in New York.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, like I said, I work in a company of 4 people. There's 2 owners, one of the owner's sons, and me. So
awesome.
So it's a small business.
That is fantastic. So, guys, one of the things, let's go in directly to the bill operation. And if you guys feel free to correct me, feel free to jump in. But what these 2 bills are, S1024 and A26A are mirror bills. And this is a process that happens in all legislative bodies. The bill gets a number, it goes through one legislative body, and then it passes on to the next legislative body. Once it goes through both legislative bodies, that in this case, the Assembly and the Senate in New York State, it will then, if it passes both, it will then go to the governor's desk for signing. And guys, since it punishes small business, I can assure you that it will be signed rather quickly. So here's where we have an opportunity to perhaps make some impact, okay? S1034 has already passed the Assembly, which this isn't the normally, or I would say predominantly, not necessarily normally, but predominantly bills are introduced in the Assembly. They get in a committee there, they get passed, and then they move to the Senate. In this case, this bill started in the Senate, made it through committee. People basically ignored it because it's like, okay, this can't even be serious. And then, boom, it passes the New York State Senate and now is in committee in the New York State Assembly. So at this point, we have an opportunity to communicate with our Assembly representatives and Assembly representatives in districts near you, and hopefully at least get this bill improved, not approved, improved, or perhaps get it scrapped or tabled. That would be, I think, what would be best. So as we walk through this, I'm going to try to do a screen share. While I'm getting the screen share ready, Rich, do you want to add anything to how I just laid that out? Do you think that was pretty fair?
Yeah, you hit all the high points. This is a kind of a backwards from normal, wherever the Senate passed it first. That's definitely unusual. And the Assembly now has the bill. It's in committee. Could be passed, as soon as Monday if they really wanted to. But the prediction from Tom Stedman's of Lawsuit Reform Alliance in New York is that it will probably get voted on sometime around budget time. So we got best case scenario, we'll probably have around a month to get to either change this thing so it's not so terrible, or hopefully say, look, this is just ridiculous, withdraw it and say, we're not going to pass this. We're not going to take it out of committee. Bills die in committee. That's okay, but it's even better to say, no, this bill's bad. We're getting rid of it. Get it out of the committee, vote it down, throw it out.
We have an awful lot of negative things that have been tabled for a long time and never actually get addressed, right?
Exactly. Well, but there's things that have been in committee for a long time, then all of a sudden you see them pop up. So,
so it's always better to just get rid of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, leaving it in committee is not necessarily a win. It might just mean it shows up again next year.
Might just mean that they're waiting for the right opportunity to get it passed.
Yeah, the Friday night before a 3-day holiday weekend. That's a favorite time to pass bills that piss us off, is the Friday before a 3-day holiday weekend.
And that's when they do it. So as you guys could probably witness, I struggled with the screen share. I did it before the show started, and it didn't come through as intended.
Can you drop that link in the?
I can. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Because that is a list of all of the committee members regarding this, correct?
It is a link to all of their names, and then I can put it up on the screen.
Labor committee, right?
Is it the late? Let me think of
yes, the labor committee. Initially thought it was the health committee. It's the labor committee that has this now in the Assembly.
Yeah.
All right. So right there is a link, guys. If you check it out, that's a link to the committee, the New York State Assembly committee, that is going to be discussing this bill before it goes to the floor for debate. So those are the people that we need to reach out to and have them scrap this bill, table this bill, or modify this bill Rich, if you were to suggest some modifications that are not that may make this better, this bill better, how would you?
Yeah, the biggest thing to improve it, and again, let's use the phrase less terrible. The thing that could make the bill less terrible. We're never going to make this thing good, but the thing to make it less terrible would be the section 10B, which legally is called private action, and that would be on page 5 of the printout I have, and it says it starts with any employee may bring a civil action seeking injunctive relief in a court of competent jurisdiction. So that paragraph, that's what enables the lawsuits between the employees, and then the attorneys acting on behalf of employees. And as I said earlier, sometimes the attorney can act on behalf of nobody, of just a fictitious employee that doesn't really exist, trolling for business to extort from small businesses, even though there's no complaint. So eliminate this whole section 10B, everything related to private. I mean, if you're gonna copy something more like the and correct me on ADA, Tom, that's really your expertise. But I know with OSHA, there's not private right of action. The fines can come from the government if you don't comply, but it's not opening up ability for lawsuits based on that. So I mean, is that true? I mean, you have trolling for ADA lawsuits, but is it the employees that can sue too? If you're
in regards to the ADA, I believe it's anybody who has an arguable case. So if it's a store, you could be a customer or someone applying for a job. If it's a school, it can be that you're a student or
but you have to be a handicapped person. You have to be someone injured by the law. You can't just be anybody, right?
Typically, yes. But in some situations, you can go as far as suing on behalf of someone else.
Right. But I couldn't sue on behalf of myself as a someone that doesn't need handicapped accessibility. I can't sue for myself, right? I can't hire an attorney and sue myself for.
Typically, no. But part of that is that the definition of disability has been widened so much.
Right.
So I mean that really takes so much more into account. It's a little more complicated with the ADA and the way the health system works.
Okay,
but,
so this might have some of the problems of the ADA also, but I think OSHA is probably a better example then, because that is really just the government regulates and the government will fine you if you don't comply. But the point I brought up last night, and then I did more research because I'm 57. I've been in construction since '85. I remember I seem to recall that OSHA kind of made a change in the '90s, and I looked it up. Yeah, it was 1996. There was a significant reform of OSHA. OSHA originally was created in 1970. But in 96, Congress said, okay, for small businesses, you have a remedy period where you can correct things, correct your mistakes. You could challenge, fines. And in some cases, they, where there used to be fines, they just said, okay, it's just this is a mine, they put different categories of egregious action and said, okay, this won't be a fine here. So we'll just correct it. You give it. I think there's a 15-day period typically to correct things. So even if you modeled this more like OSHA, it would be an improvement. So
another risk here with this legislation at hand is that someone could effectively, say, apply for a job or walk into a restaurant looking for someone who is making a mistake. Maybe they got their mask off for 30 seconds. Or whatever it is, and looking for that proof and setting up these instances to have a lawsuit.
I think that's where we're looking at an industry that supports our legislators that donates to their campaigns. The trial lawyer industry loves laws like this, and libertarians constantly want to stick our finger in the eyes of laws like this that are basically purchased and basically benefit in a huge fashion an industry that perhaps doesn't really need any more benefit from our legislators.
Yep.
Not in New York. While we're encouraging people to write the people on committee regarding this bill, why not look up your representative and see how they voted, and if they voted in favor of it. Write them and ask them why they voted in favor of something that's so detrimental to business, to small business, medium business, large business. Why would we want to continue after everything we saw in this last year, over 100,000 small businesses went under through the COVID pandemic. Why would we continue to hammer them? I mean, ask the people who voted in favor of this in the Senate, why did they do that? And I'm going to call him out, Fred Akshar again, right? He voted in favor of this. He's against the scaffold laws, but yet he wants the same kind of process over contagious disease. That doesn't make sense.
It makes sense if you frame it in the perspective of they believe that most of their constituents are afraid of catching a virus,
Right.
and that the government can in fact control that. Which the government certainly has worked hard at convincing people of that.
It
right?
makes sense from their position because they realize that the fear has worked, and at that point they are jumping on the fear bandwagon. And in regards to it was 3 Republicans that voted in favor of this, right, Rich?
3 or 4, yeah.
So in regards to the few Republicans, 4 Republicans who voted in favor of this, I mean, they've taken Cuomo's fear-mongering and jumped right on board with it. Again, that sounds like one-party rule to me, 2 parties acting as one. That's what it sounds like.
I think that's fair. I think that we should offer that as a criticism regularly. So, guys, one of the things that I want to ask people to do tonight, because the LPNY is taking a proactive stance against horrible legislation, and we are fighting for ballot access for ourselves and the Green Party. And guys, let's be honest, these things cost money. Okay, lawyers cost money, gas costs money, effective communication in our society costs money. So we're a small party. Your money, your dollars will leverage power and support voices like Rich, Tom's, and mine, getting and the whole LPNY. So basically, I posted a link here. Please check it out. Consider giving $5, $10, $50. If you're rich, give $100. Like let's grow the concept of a third party, even if like you want us to be a political action committee, whatever you would like to see us do when we're sitting here ready to fight on our time, on our dime, bad legislation on behalf of you, and we ask for a few bucks for our party. I think that that's a reasonable request. So think about it, do it. If you can, also, I think that on my Tim for Senate page, you can send me stars, which is actually a way of rewarding this show with a few dollars or a few cents. I don't know how much they cost, but please feel free to do that as well. More importantly, though, this moment now, this time in history, we're asking you to be prepared to communicate with your assembly representative, with the assembly representatives on the Standing Committee on Labor Relations, and ask them to reconsider participating with this bill. Either let it die in committee or make it better. Because, guys, look, let's be honest. There's people out there that are going to look at this bill and go, you know what's a really good idea is asking employers to take better care of their employees. And on some level, that's understandable. But, like, let's make this law at the very least so it's not the law that sues small businesses out of existence, okay? That let's make it a law that trial lawyers do not get to feast on every chance they get. You think that's fair?
If I may, let's specifically ask them to, I'm going to use Rich's words here, ask them to run a cost-benefit analysis of the effects of what they're voting on. Is that so hard to do? I mean, look, companies like Google or whatever, they're running a cost-benefit analysis on every last little thing. The United States government and the New York State government are big, powerful organizations. They can certainly run a cost-benefit analysis, and probably without taking a whole lot of time to do it. There's probably, in fact, a business out there that will do it for them. So now, let's ask them specifically to start running these cost-benefit analyses. I see this about welfare all the time. In regards to disability welfare in particular, if you don't run that cost-benefit analysis, you waste a ton of money and don't do nearly as much as you set out to do.
I agree. I think that's great. Let's field another kind of comment from Garrett. And guys, this is an area where Facebook wants to limit our reach. But when we start talking about when it comes to the pandemic, fear has been used and repeated to the extent that quite plainly an active brainwashing has occurred. To talk sense to many of them seems a moot effort. I cannot, we're on the same wavelength with observing our reality, Garrett, but to throw hope away that we can't influence legislation, I want to put that aside. I think that we can. We talked to Tom Stebbins again last night, and he was very positive that our assembly people will, in fact, listen to us. They have one or two constituents that will send them 30 letters a year. But if they hear from other constituents and other people in the state, without repetitive, let's face it, if we organize this too much and I write a letter and you guys copy my words exactly, it's not going to have a positive impact. But take a look at the law, find something you don't like about it. Feel free to contact Rich, Tom, or I and discuss what you want to say to them. Because then we can communicate with them. We can tell them why it's a bad law and why they should let it die in committee, table it, whatever the proper term for that is. And even if they have to, even if you're out there saying, all right, this law isn't that bad, tell them to fix certain parts of it that are going to crush small businesses. Those things will have impact. They were saying, like the cat lady writes them 30 letters in a year. Like, okay. But if they hear from 10 or 15 new people, they're going to assume that that's representative of the population of their district.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that whole moot point thing. That's an interesting paradigm that's gone on with our politics. The people and the government become so separated that so many of us feel like we're powerless. Right? The emphasis on the feeling of powerlessness among constituents and voters is pretty strong these days. An awful lot of people I've talked to in the last 18 months have told me, well, I'm not political. I don't think there's anything I can do about it. Or I don't believe that my voice matters, or I don't believe they're going to listen to me. And that's because we put these people who run our government up here, and we think that we ourselves are down here. And that's not the fact. That's not the way it is. We choose. We vote. And just as you were saying, if they get more and more letters from more and more people, if enough of the constituents speak up, that's not moot. That's something they'll have to take notice of because they want to keep their position. They want to keep their seated position when they run again or their next position. So it's important to reach out. It's important to communicate. And it's important to remember that you have some power, right? Every time you go in and you vote, you have that power. Every time you discuss something publicly with your friends, your family, your neighbors, you have that power. But, letter writing works. You just need enough people to do it. And that means you need to get enough people beyond that feeling of helplessness, beyond that feeling of powerlessness. And as Spike Cohen will tell you, you are the power. That's how we do it.
I love that. We are the power. Okay, so we're coming up on 45 minutes. I think that we made clear what we would like to see happen, right? We're going to try to push on some communication with our assembly representatives, okay? We're going to try to find the people on the standing committee. You're going to try to find your assembly representative, write a simple, guys, it doesn't have to be 8 paragraphs long. And as a matter of fact, politicians like Tom is saying, they put their pants on one leg at a time. They're human beings just like us. We are seeking to raise their awareness of how they have disconnected themselves from certain aspects of reality because of their peer group, right? Their peer group is the other people in the assembly.
So I would argue that the culture of Albany has separated most of our seated representatives in this state from their constituents. There's this culture around them where they pay attention to things that are not what the people want. And if we wanted to pay attention to what the people want, then we, the people, have to realize the power that we have. And we have to write those letters, and we have to talk to our neighbors, and we have to talk to our family members.
Can I make one final point here?
Let's make more points. I want to segue into something else, but please make whatever point you want to do right now, and then I'll segue into something else.
The last key phrase I'd like to share from the bill, because I've gotten feedback from people, and this is a thing that irritates several people, and it irritates me. So there's a sentence in here a couple of times. With regard to employees and with regard to employers, the term shall not include employees of the state any political subdivision of the state, a public authority, or any governmental agency or instrumentality. And it has that same sentence for employer. The term shall not include any blah, blah, blah. So this is a regulation they're exempting themselves. So what about public schools? Does this mean none of this matters for public schools, right? County office buildings, probably not. No, pretty much no government building is going to follow the regulations that they're imposing on the private sector. So it's once again hypocrisy.
Write a law that exempts
not for
themselves.
us. Yep.
Rules for thee, but not for me.
You know, if I can add one more thing, Tim, to this,
Please.
you know, while you're letter writing, right? While you're writing the committee members who are deciding this now, while you're writing the senators who voted in favor of it, also write your newspaper. Do a nice opinion piece, an op-ed about how you feel this bill will affect your business, how this bill will affect your community, what you don't like about it, all the points that we've discussed. You can reach out to myself or Rich if you want any help with that. But write your local paper. People read it.
Correct. So to take us out, we generally like to do these for about an hour, or else Queter and I will start talking about 3D printers and upper receivers, lower receivers, and how to. But guys, I think recently we saw a number of Democrats take a stand against Governor Cuomo, and then almost embarrassingly, I want to say, to me, they then voted to basically take a time limit off of his executive powers, limit them slightly, yet they didn't really go away. Ron Kim made this big, huge pile of noise about how Cuomo's a bully and how he's incompetent. Guys, if you don't mind, offer some commentary on that. Like that, I think that reflects our conversation well today, and I think people want to know where the Libertarians will stand on these kind of events. All right, this event, and I'm going to tell you guys right now, I'm embarrassed for our legislator in New York State. They basically only removed the time frame with which Cuomo's executive powers will last, and they put some moderate restrictions on future executive orders, but still empowered him to make executive orders. Light it up, man. Light up the airways, guys. What do you say? Tom, you first.
Oh, wow. Well, executive orders, come on. Let's just get rid of those altogether, with the exception of severe emergency situations, which I'm sorry, a virus is not. I would gallantly argue that what our government did during the pandemic was riskier than what it didn't do. We see this in the nursing homes, but that was set up long before we actually had COVID. It's nice to see that we're investigating these state-run nursing homes now, but they had problems beforehand. Our healthcare system, it had problems beforehand. We ended up laying off healthcare workers in the middle of this pandemic, whether you want to call it a pandemic or not. That doesn't make sense if you're battling a disease. So, get rid of the executive orders altogether, rein in the power, and decentralize as much as we can in every aspect, particularly when it comes to healthcare, Medicaid, Medicare. I'm sorry, the cost-benefit analysis is not there to prove them worthwhile. It might do good for you immediately, but your grandkids are going to regret it.
I love that. Decentralize the power. This bill centralizes power for every health decision to the New York State Department of Health. And as you know, enforcement may not keep up with the mandates, but eventually they will tax you. They will raise your taxes for enforcement. Rich, what do you think about this whole last bit of fiasco here that we've seen in New York State?
Yeah, I'd be careful that it's, if the media spends a lot of time on a topic, to me, it usually means it's smoke and mirrors, that it's a distraction.
I agree.
So it just seems like the more outrage there is about something, the more meaningless it is. That's why I say, that this bill is meaningful, because it's going to be a permanent, not temporary, permanent empowerment of the Department of Health to regulate the hell out of business with regards to all types of infectious diseases. I mean, how much more concentrated power can you get? So if I'm optimistic that, this whole thing about herd immunity at 70, 80, 90% vaccination rate, that's to sell vaccines. It's never needed that much. We're gonna probably see COVID disappear in another month to 2 months by the time the most vulnerable people get the shots, and the mortality rate is going to collapse a lot, because once everybody in the nursing homes and the elderly gets their shots, I mean, the survival for kids is like 99.998%. So, the deaths from the COVID are going to disappear within another couple months once the most vulnerable people get their shots. I don't see us, needing to get to 90%. I think it's going to disappear. The deaths are going to go down to almost zero, and the cases are probably going to go down to nearly zero by May. I'm hoping. I don't know. Like I say, smoke and mirrors. I just think.
Yeah, I think the case count is being propped up right now by asymptomatic kids they're forcing them to get tested because they've been exposed, and they have zero symptoms, right? So, and guys, let's not let Facebook totally quash our viewership, but the reality is that COVID will follow a normal viral pattern. That doesn't mean it's going to mutate to something. And as a matter of fact, guys, the 1918 swine flu was a very rare occurrence of where it did actually mutate to something more dangerous. But viruses generally mutate to things that are less virulent and more moderate in strains. And so let's move forward with our life. Let's take our power back from these guys whose virtue they want to signal on us, who want to pretend to protect us from everyday lives. Like, guys, I don't know, they're going to put us in bumper cars, man. Our cars are going to be wrapped in foam. I mean, they will make laws to make us safe.
Everybody's in a bubble.
Yep. That's right. Yep. Right. Some people, because I think, Rich, you highlighted it. Some people are anti-taking vaccines. I respect those people. I am anti-vaccine mandates and legalized, like, it's a medical procedure, guys. There is risk associated with taking a vaccine shot. Not that every single person should be afraid of taking a vaccine, but there are people that need to take proper consideration as to whether they want to take a vaccine. They have religious beliefs. It's all of those things should be respected by our society, and we need to move back towards that instead of freaking out and saying, you've got to take a vaccine. You've got to wear a mask. Like, let's move back to a more respectful society.
Yeah, and then there's medical force, right?
Correct.
We're libertarians. Good ideas don't require force. And we don't believe in market force, right? Because we don't have a vaccine market. We have a vaccine that we're required to get, right? That's the way this is going. We've seen this in the school system for other vaccines. It's not a choice for many people, and they're going down this way. It's not going to be a choice anymore. When you take the choice out of the market, then you're incentivizing an inferior product, and we don't want our vaccines to be inferior. We want them to be superior. And it's also going to make sure that price is really high. We want them to be cheaper, not more expensive.
And good quality, right? Good quality. There has to be some incentive for quality to maintain. And when the government says you have to take this, quality standards are going to slip regardless.
And right now, the liability system for vaccines is screwed up too.
Yeah. I don't know if, guys, there was a little crosstalk there. Rich said that. Please repeat what you said, Tom, or Rich, and then we'll go to you, Tom. You said something important there about vaccine liability when it comes.
Yeah, vaccine liability is a unique system. It's not like normal liability where you can directly sue as an injured party. It's done in a secret court. There's a collective fund that the vaccine manufacturers pay into that pay out. So there's not a direct point A to point B payout if there's an injury. So It kind of clouds, who was injured and what type of injury and which vaccine caused it. And the feedback loop isn't there to improve safety.
So that's an interesting contrast. The vaccine companies have that protection, right? But our small businesses, in regard to this legislation we're talking about, they don't have any protection.
They can't afford regulations, brother. The small businesses cannot afford to buy regulations, and they know that. So anyways. Anything you guys want to say in closing? Because we're getting out to about our hour. I enjoyed this conversation. I think a lot of other people did too.
Well, I want to thank you for having me, Tim. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you. Hopefully, you'll have me back again.
Oh, of course I will, sir. You know that, and I enjoy our time together.
Next time, hopefully, I'll beat you on the beard thing.
Soon.
I won that contest for the most libertarian beard in New York, and then I cut it off.
You did win that. Rich, what else you working on to take us out? Like, you got some other things you're kind of, the scaffold law, this 1024 2681, property rights stuff, guys. That's always a popular one too, right? You were looking to find some people. Go ahead, please talk about.
Well, if we're going to take us down, maybe one other key thing that the committee would like to see happen, and this came to me from a few people that homeschool and have kids in private school, is we would like a two-prong approach. Bring back the Fair Play Act and pass it, which means that if your kids are homeschooled or in a private school and there's not the sports available at that instruction, have the ability to send your kids to your local school district, public school district, to participate in sports. You're paying the same taxes as everybody else. You're not using the entirety of the public school system. You're using just a piece of it. So if anything, you're paying more for the service than other people and only taking a small benefit from it. So I think anybody that's homeschools or private schools, if they want their kids to get in district sports, the local school district should allow them to come in. And the other thing is that the Board of Regents, the Chancellor of the Board of Regents, and I'm sorry, I forget his name now, but he's got 50 years of experience in public education. And it's brought to my attention from people that homeschool and private school that the Board of Regents has too much conflict of interest in favor of public schools, and we should remove them from regulating private schools and homeschools, have them completely removed from any regulation of private schools and homeschools. There's a different entity in the state government to regulate private and homeschools. Should be entirely their responsibility. Get the Board of Regents away from it so there's not that conflict of interest.
So what is the conflict of interest? Can you point that out to us, Rich?
Well, of course, they're always going to be holding up the private schoolers and homeschoolers to the same standards as the public schools when it might not fit, it might not be appropriate all the time. So and I had an argument with someone on Twitter earlier today. I'm a big fan of diversity in education, and unfortunately, there's so much thrust now with central planning of curriculum, federal planning of curriculum, state planning of curriculum, because they want it so kids are all taught the same thing. The big thing that they always hold up, well, if a kid moves from Pennsylvania to Texas, we don't want them to fall behind. That's the excuse that's given. And there could be some challenges when you move from one part of the country to another if the curriculum is not identical. But there's a lot of benefits to having different curriculums. We don't need to teach the same thing to kids everywhere. Why do we want carbon copy kids where they all know the same thing? I think there's benefits to diversity, and I think that what we create through all this regulation to ensure that there's commonality is higher costs, kids who aren't thrilled with going to school because it's more boring to them because we're not letting any kind of regional interest influence what they're taught. I just think it's counterproductive. So that's probably the biggest conflict of interest, is that public education is so standardized all around the country, and you're trying to shoehorn private and homeschooling into that same mold. And when the Board of Regents regulates, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get private schools and homeschools that are teaching the same stuff as the public schools, and I just don't think that's beneficial.
Yeah.
25 years ago, when I was still in high school, occasionally we'd have a new kid come in who was either homeschooled, went to private school, or came from out of state. In all three instances, they were always ahead of us. They always had a better grasp of what we were doing and learning. And
I think it's a good point. I think we can see evidence that Catholic schools have been able, and private schools have been able to meet the demands of this COVID restriction system, because they don't have this prescription. This, if 3 kids test positive, you got to close for 2 weeks or whatever. They can work around the requirements that the state offers. So kids that surprisingly they were still going to school when lots of our kids were not. And I think that's a big deal. Like, I think that's a real big deal to recognize. And guys, this is an area where New York State is far behind the curve. We used to lead in innovation. We used to lead in things, okay? We are far behind the curve. States all over the country are introducing bills where education money follows the student. that is a libertarian solution to things that we are talking about right here. You will be able to pick the institution that interests your kids the most. It will increase school choice. It will increase school diversity. And they will find things to interest your kids because they're going to make money by having children attend their school. It's a wonderful thing to look at. It's a forward-thinking plan. And I, as a libertarian, support that concept, right? And it's been introduced on some levels in Kentucky. It's if I understand it correctly, it's actually in play in Wyoming. It's been introduced in Colorado. I mean, we should jump on these kind of leadership ideas in New York State to prove that we are, in fact, leadership oriented like we used to be. And I don't think that we are anymore.
Some states have had a voucher system for a number of years. I did some research on that like around 6 years ago. I put a slideshow together on it. One thing I found that disturbed me about it, though, was that some states with their voucher programs required children to test drive a public school. So they were not voucher eligible until they spent some time in a public school. And that really is a terrible, terrible plan, because if the parents are inclined to use a private school or homeschool, that's what they want. And why are you forcing them to send the kid to a public school, make friends, and then say, okay, I'm pulling you out now because I only did this because I had to do it so I could get my voucher or to get my reimbursement to buy books if I'm homeschooling. Gosh, it's just using kids as pawns. There's 3 or 4 states that do that, and it's terrible. I hope that there's a huge number of states now looking at school choice voucher programs, and I really don't hope none of them do this test drive thing, because it's just very, it's obviously what they're trying to do is get the kid in the public school, get him to make friends, and then fight with the parents and say, I don't want to leave. I've made friends here, even though the parents never wanted to send the kids there in the first place. So it's a way to manipulate.
I think we found enough. Like, this topic could be our next show, fellas. So it's been an hour. We're taking it out there. Guys, we appreciate y'all being here. We appreciate the comments. Thank you very much. We appreciate the likes, the comments, the shares. And guys, let's face it, guys like Rich, Tom, and I doing some work on everyone's behalf. We don't care if you're a Democrat. We don't care if you're a Republican. We care about better legislation. We care about principles, and we care about the future of our state, New York State. And so we're going to put in effort. Guys, we are putting in effort. We will continue to put in effort. Anything that you can do to support us, and even likes, comments, shares, is supporting us. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate it, and we look forward to talking to you again. And guys, if you were late, watch the show again. Leave a comment or two. That will still help Facebook share it to other people, and they may want to, revisit this or join us for our next show. So Shelly, Ryan, don't worry about being late. I'm still glad that you're here. And you guys all have a great Saturday night. I'm going to go hang out with my kids or watch Star Trek: The Next Generation, something like that. Guys, have a good night.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
My pleasure.
Tim, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for putting out the effort. Guys, this can be like nerve-wracking, right? Thank you for doing it. Thanks for taking on this challenge. I appreciate it. And you guys all out there, have a good night.